introduce Nils Torvalds, who is a member of the European Parliament, who has a very long experience of Russia, studying in Moscow in the 70s, I think it was, and working as a Moscow correspondent for the Finnish broadcasting company for 4 years in the late 90s. Yes. Please take the floor and welcome Nils Torvalds.
Thank you. You all heard the laughter when Anna-Lena slightly ironically said that I'm going to sum up something which I didn't even hear, which is sort of usually happens in politics. But I have to tell you one secret, or reveal a secret. I had an agent here among you. So, Mats, could you just stand up? Because Mats is one of my assistants in Brussels, and he sent me 2 emails earlier of what all you had said. So, I'm pretty well prepared. I would like to start with some questions of our hopes of 1991. I think we all had big hopes. We in Finland, you in Netherlands, and I think especially you in Russia, in the Soviet Union. We had very big hopes of something great going to happen. And then we have to ask ourselves, why didn't that happen? Or what came in between? And I think a lot of things came in between. I actually think that we, 1991, were pretty naive. First of all, if we start with the political part, you all remember the Hasbulat of Parliament. I think one of the problems they had in 1991 and for some years onward was that the Parliament actually liked to be the executive. And that's, of course, a no-go. So you had, due to the fact that the Hasbulat of Parliament wanted to be an executive, you had to have the conflict between the presidency and in many respects, very democratically inclined Parliament. So you had actually a misconception of division of powers, which is due to lack of political experience. I came to Moscow in 1995 in October as a very enthusiastic correspondent, and during the first month I happened to live in Krylatskoye, and I saw Grigory Alexeyevich sometimes in the same superstore there because he lived close by. I didn't reach out to him at that time because he probably didn't think it worth to speak with a very enthusiastic young journalist. But what we had in the late 90s, before everything came down, was actually something more or less like a free press. You had Nezavisymaya Gazeta, you had Kommersant, you had, above all, you had NTV and the program Kukli, and Kukli was a very funny program, daring to make fun of all politicians, regardless of where they stood on the political spectrum. So we saw something of a free press and a criticism of the political parties and politics in general. But I think the biggest shortcoming was actually the lack of a civil society. Galina Mikhailova already spoke about Grazhanskoye Общество. I think it's a sad and long story about when we speak about the Russian civil society. When we speak about the Finnish civil society, it actually dates almost to the same time. The Finnish civil society started to be built around the late 18th century. And you saw traces of a starting of a growing civil society in Russia also at that time. And there is a sad story. 1928, the Russian Biblical Society was forbidden, because They thought it was a revolutionary organization. And that's the way when you treat civil society, every part of civil society, like having a revolutionary organization there, I think you are bound to make terrible mistakes, and they did. One of my most emotionally impressive journeys back from Moscow at the train was once when I had a Russian couple in that train. And we spoke about this and that, chit-chatting during the evening starting from Moscow, and in the morning, while approaching the Finnish border, we continued chit-chatting. And all of a sudden, when they passed the Finnish-Russian border, they sat with their noses to the window and just stared. And I was sort of confused. What the hell are they looking for so intensively? And after an hour, I dared to ask them, what's so funny or what's so interesting out there? And they said, it's so clean. Because in a functioning civil society, every citizen actually takes care of that society. And you can read it in how clean a civil society is. So when you have lots of garbage all around in a democratic society, you could actually say that now something is going wrong there. And it's the same story all those who know the very famous Russian film Особенности национальной охоты knows there is a Finnish hero in that film, and he starts to pick cigarette stubs from the street, and that's of course something which he could go on for the next century doing, because there were at least 1 million. So in the long run, when we speak about solutions for Russia, we speak about societal things, not so much about political things. And therefore I think that the new law censoring civil organizations is actually a catastrophe. It's what you in Russia would say, это очень КГБшная. So, and now the latest trial of Alexei Navalny is well, the same thing. They are going in the same direction. And that direction is, it's not wrong just for us. It's not just a question of our being moralist or moralistical. It's a catastrophe for the Russian society. It's a catastrophe for those who would like a better future for Russia. And we must, of course, say what we think about practices like that. But at the same time, we can't just sort of be the wise guy who is always condemning Russia if we are silent about what's going on in Europe and in EU. So I think my friend here speaking earlier about double standards, I think we have to clean our part first. We have to clean our act to be able to be a serious critics of what's going on in Russia. That is, so we have to have values for which we can stand in good and bad. And I think Grigory Alexeyevich spoke about that. I think Astrid spoke about that, and I think we all agree about that. I think we should also give a clear signal in the Magnitsky case. Why? One of my first experiences as a fairly young correspondent in Moscow was that fairly close to Kremlin, my car, or the company car, the YLE car, was actually stopped by a police officer, and he said, "Your license plate is on the wrong side." And I said, "What the heck are you speaking?" this has been through Aftoinspektia several times, and that's the way they have expected. Your license plate is on the wrong side. And I said something not very nice, as I sometimes do, and this confrontation ended up in my car and myself being arrested. And I had my photographer with me, so I said to him, just push the red button, we're going to tape this. So we did. But there is a tradition of police officers or state officers standing miles above the normal citizen. And the possibility to get it right with him are sort of nil. No, there is no way. He's always the stronger one. So when we look at the Magnitsky case, we are actually looking at something which ended from a human point of view in something very tragic. But the roots of that behavior is very deep in the repressive system of Russia and the Soviet Union. And we are not. I was quitted in sort of 10 minutes. I didn't sit that longer. So I actually didn't suffer from it. But the Russian society suffers. We usually speak of a middle class, Russian middle class, in connection with civil society. But we sometimes forget that what we today call the Russian middle class isn't the very, very hard-working middle class which was a central part of building the civil society in the 19th century. So we are easily confusing some of the most intricate societal questions we have there. Some part of the Russian middle class is actually just getting spillovers from a very corruptive system. When you have oil income, there is one exception from the rule, but when you have oil income, you have corruption because you get to a centralized system, you get money for almost nothing. And then that money trickles down through different channels to what is called a middle class. There's just one exception from this corruption rule with oil, and that's of course Norway. Because then they succeeded to build a fairly stable civil society before they were hit by this societal catastrophe of oil. But again from a very Finnish society, Russia hasn't always been a very bad neighbor. Russia has in many periods been a good neighbor. And I think we should be able to see that in all political conflicts, the Russian leadership has asked for one thing. They have asked for parity. They have asked to be treated with a certain respect and as an equal. That they are an equal doesn't mean that they are a nice equal always. But they should be treated with a certain respect. Because their history is much more tragic than our history. And we should always keep in mind what they have gone through. And I think the 9th of May, when we are celebrating the Europe Day here, and in Russia they will celebrate Den Pobedi, we should remember what they were forced to suffer. They were forced to suffer by Nazi Germany. They were forced to suffer by a leadership that didn't count, sort of. human lives very much. In the first days of the Second World War, the Red Army lost about 25 to 50% of its personnel because of bad planning. That's a crime. That's a crime against Russian human beings. So we should understand something of the history, and we should therefore also respect. But paying respect to the history and to sufferings doesn't mean that we could or should accept anything. Paying respect is also paying respect to the values we think are European. And we think that Russia is a European country that should be obeying those values. But that's all for today, folks. Thank you, and have a nice trip home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nils. I will now, I promise, tell the last concluding remarks of this seminar. I never write usually any of my speeches or any remarks before the last minute, because there are always things which influence you at the last minute, and this seminar is no exception. By the way, I'm extremely grateful to the organizers, because thanks to this seminar I got 20 minutes all to myself with Mr. Grigory Yavlinsky, which would never ever happen in Moscow, where I live and work, where you can never get 20 minutes all to yourself with people on this level. I'm extremely grateful for this, and as a real Russian intellectual, he surprised me, and you will see the result in Who Was a Spotted later. In any case, I would like to, I have two remarks after having spent the day with all of you. One is pessimistic, the other optimistic. When Kristina Oiland said that in Belarus there's I know for a fact that the number of Schengen visas among Belarusian citizens is huge, and it has also in a way enhanced the opposition against Lukashenko. There is a very optimistic misconception in Europe that the more Russians travel, the more they see of Europe, the more they see of our democracies, the more inclined to democracy they will become themselves. I have lived in Russia since 2006. I'm 37 years old, and I have a number of Russian friends of my age. And I can tell you that what they're interested in Europe is skiing, clothes, traveling, restaurants, good food, good wine. They're not interested in democracy. You can very well ski in Courchevel or dive in Thailand and not being interested in democracy. These things are not intertwined, unfortunately. I very much fight with my friends about a number of things, mostly about Stalinism and Russian history. And I remember very well, very vividly, one discussion I had with one of my best friends, Anna, about Stalinism, when she told me that you must understand that you can't, Stalin wasn't such a bad leader as you think. And I asked him, so what did Stalin do to your family? She said both my grandparents were kulaks, so they were all of them were sent to the Gulag. Or the Gulag didn't exist at that time, really, but they were all taken, everything was taken from them, and they were sent away from their homes. And I asked her, so how come you cannot be of the opinion that this should never ever repeat itself? And then Anya looks at me and says, but you must understand, if it happens, it happens. We can't do anything. This is a person who speaks English, French fluently and has been living in Geneva for the past 5 years. A very intelligent person and liberal person. So on the one hand, I think it's extremely important not to believe that traveling and globalization will solve everything. It doesn't. Because the history and the market that's left in Russians is a lot deeper than this. Then to my other remark, I met an old acquaintance at this seminar. His name is Alexei Gorbachev. I don't know if he's here in the audience right now, but today he works as a correspondent or as a journalist for Nezavisima Gazeta. And we met for the first time 2 years ago when I was in Moscow making a story about 70 years since the fall of the communism. A year and a half ago. And I wanted to interview young people who are active in society and who are also active in the opposition movement. This was before the Bolotnaya demonstration in December 2011. This was in June 2011. And Alexei Gorbachev was one of these young people that I met at a bar. We had a very long and very chaotic interview, as usual, when you interview people in Russia, especially if you interview several people in Russia. And all of these young people from different democratic movements had different views on how Russia should reach democracy. They could only agree on the fact that we must do something, but nobody knew what to do. Then we all left together from the restaurant and we had to go to the other side of the street. Actually, we were sitting in a restaurant close to Triumfalnaya Ploshad, which half a year later would turn out to be the first demonstration, a small demonstration against Putin after the elections, which afterwards turned bigger. And we went under the street in a so-called perehod, which is a tunnel under the street, which always stinks of urine and is usually not a very nice place to be. And there, all of a sudden, all these young people started screaming as on a given signal. Nobody had said anything. Россия без Путина. Russia without Putin. And then, half a year later, I was standing in Bolotnaya, at Bolotnaya Square in December 2011, and to my amazement could see tens of thousands of people protesting against Putin. This was the first time in my life that I could actually feel that Russians, tens of thousands of Russians, actually believed they could together achieve something and they could change the society together. And I'm still very touched by the fact that I was there at this moment. So my concluding remark is simple. Whatever we think, whatever we say, whatever we speculate, there will always be another Russia. Thank you very much.